So tonight, as Jeffrey stated, we will be discussing about his book, his passion, himself as an individual, his story, and also what inspired him to write this book. Why did he feel like there's a calling to talk to leaders, especially leaders in Africa, for them to understand the paradigm shift when it comes to leadership. For those of you that don't know Mr. Obenson, I will read his brief bio for you all. So Mr. Obenson currently serves as the President and Chief Executive Officer of the International Institute of St. Louis. Prior to joining the International Institute, Mr. Obenson served as the founder and Chief Executive Officer for Transformity, a firm that helps corporations and organizations earn its opportunity to transform the world. Transformity assists organizations in addressing complex challenges through strategic development, movement building, advocacy, as well as strategic events. Prior to founding Transformity, Arrey served as the Secretary General of Junior Chamber International, which is also known as JCI, a global network of 150,000 young active citizens in more than 100 countries that empower young people to create positive change in the community. As their Secretary General, Obenson was the Chief Administrative Officer leading implementation of the organization overall strategy and supervising the team in accomplishing the mission of the organization across the world. For 17 years, he led Junior Chamber International at various levels, including as the Director of Africa and Middle East, Executive Director, and lastly, the Deputy Secretary General. Arrey is a barrister of law, a member of the Cameroonian Bar Association, and an inspiring speaker who has engaged audiences in nearly 100 countries. He holds a Master of Law degree from Washington University in St. Louis, and he lives in St. Louis with his wife, Victorine, and their two sons. Arrey is the author of the recently published book, Bridging the Opportunity Gap, and one of the reasons why we're here today. So thank you all for attending this talk tonight, and also Mr. Obenson, thank you so much for being here with us today. So, Mr. Benson, let's try to get to know you. Beside your fancy biography, what is something that people don't really know about you when they hear your name? Ari Obenson, the CEO of International Institute, the author of Bridging Opportunity Gap.
Yeah. Let me just start by saying I think one of the things that is not portrayed in the bio is that I always tell people that my most important job is I'm a husband. That's my most important job, and then secondly, I'm a father, and then everything else can come in that order. But that's I really like to be defined in that way. And then secondly, I'm from an obscure country called Cameroon, and when many people do not know that Cameroon is it's a bilingual country. I mean, it's French and English speaking, and many people think Cameroon is French speaking, but it's actually a bilingual country. And Cameroon as a country is facing enormous challenges. I know it is. It's a forgotten conflict, but one of the things that really breaks my heart about the beautiful country of Cameroon is that there's been an ongoing conflict in Cameroon in the last 5 years that the world seems to not pay attention to, and yet we have about 60,000 Cameroonians who are living as refugees in Nigeria. We have about 800,000 who are internally displaced within the country. And we've had tens of thousands of people who have lost their lives and over 400 villages that have been burned down. And this is a crisis that the world doesn't know about. And one of the things that I'm embarking on is really trying to aid every opportunity that I have to speak to people. I talk about this Cameroon crisis because that's the only way. It's only by bringing attention to it that we will that we will make a difference. So I've spent most of my adult life. I'm a lawyer by training. I actually practice law in Cameroon, but I spent most of my life not in the courtroom, but actually meeting people in communities across the world. I have been lucky enough to travel to about 106 countries in the world, and I've learned a lot about the human race. What I've learned about the human race is that we have a lot more in common than we think. That there are three things that essentially make us common. One is that we have the same needs as human beings. No matter where you go, we need the same things to survive. Like we need the air, the water, we need good quality water, we need clean air. We need those things to survive. Secondly, we have the same wants. What are our wants? We want to prosper. We want the next generation to do better. We want to live comfortably. And thirdly, we have the same fears. We fear the unknown. Going as far back as Arrey man who was living in cages, the first thing that they did was protect themselves against the order, right? And if you can understand these three things, that this is what is common about humanity, then it breaks the barriers in engagement. And I think that the world is plagued by the labels that we have placed on ourselves. That suddenly the people who were living in the massive African continent have now been defined by the colors of flags and boundaries that are man-made, right? And so we divide ourselves. We call ourselves one race over the other race. And all of that is a creation of language. So I have learned a lot in this process that we really need to think about ourselves as the human race, and we can survive. So I'm also I'm an activist. I really like to focus on helping people understand, that we have a common destiny. That's just some things that about me added to because I've gotten this exposure to the world. It has given me a really different perspective of how I approach challenges. Did we lose Brian? I think we did.
Hello?
I think we lost Brian.
I think we lost him, probably. Okay. That's okay. Yeah. But thank you so much for that great. It's so sad to hear that a lot of things that we are trying to impose ourselves, that trying to help, make us to see how different we are, as opposed to focusing on how much common we have, many things we have in common as human race. So, and I've been following up with you so many conversations. I see your heart is in Cameroon, and it blades a lot. So I feel like the passion that you have for your country, and not just for your country, but also for the continent of Africa, it's very clear. So, and I know he will be joining us, but I think the next question I ask you is probably, what made you to write this book, and why this topic?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for that question. So I wrote this book. This was the pandemic, right? We had, for many years, I had been, people had asked me to write a book, and I was thinking, what will I write a book about? And I've never been taught that I had any story to tell in a book. But then the pandemic came along, and it just dawned on me that this may be the moment for me to use my pandemic time I actually started writing the book before the pandemic, and I actually started writing this book on the 24th of September of 2019. And I was attending the United Nations General Assembly. And I went from the first day of the General Assembly when there was this big push about what we call the decade of action, and it has to do with the Sustainable Development Goals. And I went back to my hotel room and kind of sat down and said, I need to write something, because this book, the title of this book is Bridging the Opportunity Gap. The opportunity gap is the difference between the status quo and the potential of where we can be, either as individuals, as a business, as a country, as a continent, or as the world. And bridging the gap is really the kind of thinking that we have to solve the biggest challenges that the world faces. Now, I had spent 20 years traveling the world, learning about so many things on my path. And every time people ask me about my experience in those last 20 years, there was never enough time. We have 1 hour to talk about my experience. Well, I cannot talk about my experience in 1 hour, so I put it in a book. There's never a stage that is big enough to share this experience. So I decided to put it in a book. I just decided to encapsulate this 20 years of my experience into a book. And the origin of this book, I wrote probably maybe like 500 pages, and I was like every day struggling to reduce it, because writing a book is one thing, but having people read and enjoy a book is another thing. And I wanted a book that was easy to read, that somebody could read it on one flight. And in doing a lot of research, I found out that 40,000 words is actually the magic word that somebody can read on an 8-hour flight to London, or flying to Africa. You can read it, because I know that people are very, very busy. And that's what I decided to put it in a book, so that I can share my experience. Secondly, this experience can be transported, it can be carried, it can be handed over to generations. It's written, it's there, it's always going to be in the Library of Congress. It's a book that's published. So what I've written could last generations after me. And I thought that that was one way in which I could preserve this experience and hand it over to the next generation. So that's why I decided to write a book.
Wow. I like that, the power of storytelling, not only within one generation, but also within multiple generation. I love the idea of that. Mr. Benson, realistically speaking, when we look at, in the lens of equity, when it comes to achieving things, different people have different route, different people have different struggle. So when we talk about, bridging the opportunity gaps, so what would you suggest that, women and young people, what are some of the ways in which they can bridge the opportunity gap compared to other people that have an upper hand in society? Because it seems like the mechanism might be different from each people. And we figure out a ways in which young folks who wants to be a leader, or just people that are historically being underrepresented, who also want to stand up for themselves. What are some of the ways in which they can also bridge the opportunity gap to achieve upward mobility?
Yeah. So the premise of this book essentially it's very simple premise. It says that individuals that focus on their challenges are defined by their challenges. On the other hand, individuals that focus on their opportunities are defined by their opportunities. Anybody, organizations, or business that focus on the challenges are spend all of their energy on their challenges. And when you focus on your challenges, you're focusing on the status quo, right? Whilst if you focus on the opportunities, you're focusing on the future and you're focusing on growth. Challenge is status quo, opportunity is growth. Challenge is yesterday, opportunity is tomorrow. Challenge is the past, your influence is in the future. So you have to, it's a mindset. It's a mindset that tells you that you're not condemned to be where you are. It's a mindset that tells you that there is another story, there is another path that you can take on your journey. So in the context of that mindset, what I would do, and I've traveled across the world and found people, spending time in Madagascar, which is or Niger, those are very poor countries, and listening to people's stories. And sometimes you get into a community and the only thing that you hear is what is wrong with the community. Now, what is wrong is not what is going to define that community unless you want that to be. But focusing on what could be right about the community is where the opportunity is. So take, for example, you get into a community and every solution that you try to bring to them is seen in the context of this is impossible, right? Because they have just not seen any other alternative. So it takes time for people to develop this mindset. Mindset is really important. And you've seen how I have seen over time that as people have changed their mindset, they are able to overcome challenges that they didn't imagine that they could overcome. And in the book, I tell lots of stories about how that transformation can happen in people. And I want to use one example, which I use in the book here. I use the phrase naive audacity to talk about that mindset change. And I'll use the story of my situation in Cameroon. It's in Limbe, Cameroon, and I was practicing law, right? I just started out law. I was, not doing well. I was sharing an apartment with a colleague, and we lived in a house that when it rained, there was a river in front of the house. The water would flood into our house. We wake up some days and step up the bed and there's water on the floor. So we're not doing well, right? But even in those circumstances, I went to visit the local hospital in my community. And in visiting that hospital, the executive director had taken me on a tour of the hospital. And I found out that in that hospital, which received about 150,000 people every year, that there were no functioning toilets. In many African countries, hospitals are built like wards. They call them wards. And each ward would have the beds in the ward. And then at the end of the hospital, there would be the lavatory or the toilet or the wash houses. That's what they call them, wash houses, which had toilets and showers. There were 14 in this hospital and there was not one working. There were women who were coming to this hospital to have children. They were dying out of infection. Couldn't have a toilet that's working in a hospital. The only toilet that was working was that of the director. Now, I was 26 years old and barely trying to put food on the table. And what we did after that experience is what brought me to where I am sitting today. It became transformational because we went back, no money in our pocket, went and took pictures of this hospital, went to a community trade fair and posted these pictures in a booth. We raised our own money to rent a booth in a trade show where people were actual businesses were coming there to make money. We went to lose money. And we put the pictures of the community hospital there. Long story short, we were able to raise about $60,000 to build, almost transform the entire hospital. Guess what? In the city that we lived in, there was an oil company, Sonara, an oil refinery, that with the twinkle of an eye could have rebuilt the hospital. It wasn't done. There was a plantation, the Cameroon Development Corporation, one of the biggest plantations in West Africa, that could have built that hospital. They didn't. I, 26 years old, poor, barely making ends meet, could have sat down and said, that's somebody else's problem. That change, what we did at that moment, I had no idea that it was transformational in my life. That is the moment that brought me to where I am today. I just had to make the decision to focus on the opportunity, and everything else followed. So that's an example, and that's what I would tell people that you have to change your mindset and focus on the opportunity, not the challenge.
I mean, shifting mindset and cultivating mindset is very important because it would change one's trajectory for lifetime. I have a personal question to you, Mr. Obenson. What if, someone's entire life is, operating on that default setting or just thinking about the challenges rather than the opportunity? How can we as an individual, or how can we as a collective group of people that are concerned about the environment and our community that we live in, how can we help those people to shift their mindset from looking at the challenges to looking at the opportunity? Because sometimes all we see is challenges. We can't move beyond that because that's what society has been fed to us, and we can't see any other world beyond the challenges. And for some people, opportunity might be something foreign, might be a different language, so it can be very difficult to introduce them to those ideas.
You're right. Somebody asked, I'm going to come to this question, Brian, but somebody asked what naive audacity is. A naive audacity is where you have a vision so strong that you look beyond the obstacles of getting there. And it ties to the question that you just asked, because sometimes we're blinded by the obstacle that we fail to see that beyond the obstacle is where the opportunity lies. There's a story which says that I don't know, but I've been told that the streets of the city have been paved with gold. I don't know, but I've been told that the streets of the city have been paved with gold. And there's a joke in Cameroon that somebody left the village, came to the city and was looking for gold on the streets and never could find it. But there was gold everywhere and the person just couldn't see, right? That's the same thing with this whole mindset thing is that you can be born into circumstances that only allow you to see what the obstacles are. And we all arrive at our conclusion. Our whole philosophy of life is based on what we are exposed to, right? So if somebody is not exposed to this mindset, this change in mindset, then you cannot expect them to change. So that's why we write books like this, so that we can inspire people to start thinking differently. What I would say is that we who have the opportunity have a responsibility. That's why I spend my every Saturday doing something to inspire people around the world, because I don't know how many people I have inspired. I don't know how much transformation I made. But one thing I'm sure is that every single day that I have a conversation like this, I'm hoping that one person leaves this conversation with a mindset change. And that person, their path opens up to them endless possibilities, endless opportunities. And I hope that they too can inspire people. But mindset change is a process. It's a process that begins with you trying to see what is possible in terms of your own abilities as an individual. You have to start trying to think differently. And this is why you have breakthroughs in life. That we as human beings were fascinated by stories of people who break through in life. He came from a very, very humble beginnings, and this is what he has achieved. And you ask yourself, why was that person able to achieve that? They may not know it, but they were only able to achieve it because they were focused on the outcome and not the process. In life, there are two kinds of people, right? There are people who are so focused on the process that they're stuck with the process, that the outcome, they don't see the outcome. But it's the most inspiring thing in life is seeing the outcome, right? If you can paint a picture of what the future looks like and talk to people across the world who have achieved anything. Talk to Lionel Messi. He must have dreamed at some point that he was going to be one of the biggest players in the world, and he hung on to that dream. Talk to Usain Bolt. He must have imagined at some point. What you achieve is an imagination of your subconscious. You just don't know it. You may not get to the level that you imagine, but you move in that direction unconsciously, that you're moving in that direction. So that's what I'll tell people who have that mindset. It is not all, if everything was just doom and gloom, how come some people succeed? Now, Granted that you may not have the same opportunities. We all don't have the same opportunities. One thing I know that we all have is the same abilities. So depending on what the circumstances, with the abilities that you have, you can certainly move from your challenge to the opportunity.
You know, with that speech, I think I'm going to run for the president of the United States of America.
It's all in the mind.
I like it. I like when you mentioned that what you achieve is an imagination of your self consciousness, you know, because it
Yep.
seems like nowadays, whatever we bring into fruition, that's something that we've been thinking about. We actively work towards it to make it happen. We use our different opportunities that we have, our stakeholders, our resources, and making sure that that comes to fruition. So, thank you for that. And my next question is, you probably already answered this question, but I want to know from your own perspective, the book, your book, is it? Do you write it for young people? Do you write it for new leaders, or do you write it for seasoned leaders to change their mindset and perspective and how they see leadership?
Yeah. So somewhere in this book, I kind of touch on what I consider will be the success of this book. And for me, the success of this book is not whether we sell 100,000 copies, right? That's not the success of this book. For me, the success of this book is how many young people read it and how it transforms their lives and how they go on to do bigger and greater things than they can imagine. So I basically wrote this book because I had spent a lot of my time working with young people, emerging leaders, middle-level cards and companies, small business owners across the world. And that was the target group that I wrote this book for. Interestingly enough, by the time I'm done with this book and the feedback that I'm seeing and the people who have read this book, I think that the book, and even when I sent it out for people to do the reviews before, I realized that it was for everybody. The young, the old, everybody could, when I sent this, the first person that I sent this book to read this book in one night, and the next day wrote a review of this book in Forbes magazine, which I didn't ask for, but he wrote a review of the book in Forbes magazine because he was listed as amongst the top 4 books to read in 2021, I think, alongside Obama's book, actually, this book. And I was fascinated by it, and I asked, why did it? He said, because the book really spoke to him. And this is a business leader with the vice president of a global company. He said the book spoke to him in the sense that it spoke to the challenges that he, as a leader of an organization, faced every day. The struggle between challenge and opportunity, the struggle between process and outcome. That is an eternal struggle that we have as community leaders or even as individuals, right? You look at the obstacles in your way for you to wake up in the morning and go jogging. But if you focused on the outcome, what will this mean? A healthy outcome for you in your life. If you focus on that outcome, I say, you focus on how you want to look like, how healthy you want to be at 70, and then it will determine how you're going to live your life today, right? So focus on that outcome to find the motivation in that outcome, and then it would unconsciously drive the way that you're living. And that's the challenge that every leader faces. I'm leading an organization, and when you start up a conversation and ask somebody, so let's talk about this organization, and one person talks about something wrong, everybody talks about something wrong, and then it distorts the focus. And if you are only complaining about what is wrong today, how do we grow the organization? What if we're motivated by the things that could be right? So that's whom I wrote the book for. But one thing that's special in the writing of this book is that I brought the Africanness in me into this book, right? I wanted to write a book for a global audience, but I wanted to make people know that this is from Africa, right? I brought my Africanness, and now that I'm talking to my African brothers and sisters, I get excited about this because every chapter of this book starts with an African proverb. And these African proverbs are concepts in management, right? You could actually apply our African concepts in management, which we don't think about that. But all of our African saints that are parents and grandparents, they were so wise that they looked at the world from a different perspective. And if you read every chapter that I write, I started with an African proverb because that's the Africanness in me. And I also, for me, I see the biggest opportunity that the world has today is Africa. That's the biggest opportunity for growth. We're talking about the climate. Today, I was actually a speaker this morning at COP26 with reference, and we're talking about what bridging the opportunity gap, because that's how we need to think about it. That we're trying to solve the world's biggest problems. You cannot solve it without the world's biggest opportunity, and that's Africa. And if we can get Africa on board on climate change, if we can make the climate become an opportunity for prosperity in Africa, we solve the world's biggest problems. And that's how I look at it. So it's a book for everybody in that sense.
Wow, thank you, thank you. Seems like the book have like multiple messages that are very, very important and instrumental to our life. So I want to know, what takeaway do you want people to get from reading the book, taking time to read the book and reflect about the book? What takeaway you want them to get from reading the book?
Well, the takeaway that I want people to leave with is that we can solve all the problems that the world is facing. That there's no problem that is too big to solve. And the only way that we have to address it is change the way we look at the problem. So we look at, and I go back to Africa, we look at Africa and we see challenges. I look at Africa and I see opportunity. That we're having thousands of young people trying to cross the Mediterranean to go into Europe to find greener pastures. And all that we do in Europe is spend a lot of money trying to stop them from getting into Europe. What if we spend that money trying to create opportunities for them to stay in Africa? What is it that cannot be built in Africa that we spend so much money trying to prevent them from coming to Europe? It's a very simple proposition. That a lot, if you even think about it, look at the pandemic. If you went to the world and asked the world, or take the United States, we're mostly in the United States here. If you went to the US government and asked for $5 billion or $5 trillion, which we're struggling now to get, the Congress would say no. Well, the pandemic came, and what people have forgotten was that within 2 months, we spent $5 trillion trying to keep people at home and try to protect people's lives. If we could do that in 2 months, how come we have not raised $15 trillion to solve the biggest challenge that the world faces, which is poverty? And if you can address poverty, then of course, you could prevent a lot of conflicts. You could reverse climate change. There's so many, we could live in a more peaceful world if people just had opportunity. So that's the biggest takeaway, is that mindset is the key to solving the world's biggest problems, the biggest challenges. And that I want people to, all right. And one thing that inspired me as well, and if you don't mind, I'm going to read a short passage here from the book, because I was speaking to some African leaders when I was leading my former organization, and I wrote this in the book, and here's my message to the young people in that room. It has been 50 years, because at the time this was 2012, it has been 50 years and more since African countries attained independence. 50 years ago, young people like you in this room had dreams. big dreams. They dreamed of an Africa that was free and independent, an Africa in which every child that was born had access to clean, potable water, good quality education, good quality health, and justice. They dreamed of a continent that had no reason to envy the West, a continent with good roads, hospitals, universities, and city parks. They were young people in their late 20s and 30s. They stood for something bigger than themselves. They were visionary. Now here we are 50 years after most African countries have attained independence, and yet the dreams of our founders still elude us. They gave us independence. They gave us countries and flags we represent in this room, and now it's our time. What will we give the next generation of Africans? What will the next generation say to our generation? What were our dreams? What were our hopes and aspirations? And what did we do about it? For over 50 years, at the time that was my organization, had professed to create leaders on the continent. We have had all sorts of titles and occupied all sorts of positions, and yet Africa still lags behind. We're sitting in a 5-star hotel room in Casablanca, all dressed up in suits, and yet outside the room is a continent that is plagued with poverty, corruption, and conflict. 50 years of trying to bring change, and yet not every child that was born on the continent has access to potable water, decent quality education, and access to healthcare. This is not the story of the countries we want. This is not the dream our founders had. And so I challenge them at the end. I challenge you, my brothers and sisters, to stand for something bigger than yourself. We are nothing if we're in this for self-aggrandizement, if we're just talking about ourselves, talking big, and yet we are not relevant to the people. And the continent really needs that. So I challenge them. And when I finished that conversation, and I walked off the stage, I knew that I couldn't just challenge people, that I had to be an example. And since then, I've been engaged with my country, Cameroon, trying to do what I can to save this country, to save Cameroon and Africa. I've even started a movement called I Am Cameroon. We've mobilized thousands of young people trying to do the best that we can. In 2017, I tried to go back to Cameroon and they wouldn't allow me get into the country. Just because people focus too much on the wrong things, right? When we're trying to build the continent, build the country for a future that we want to be different. So I wanted to just share that story because that is the question that we should be asking ourselves. We should be asking ourselves this. Like, what are we going to leave behind for the next generation? You know, and but those are some takeaways that I want people to ask themselves questions as we go along. And this could be said of the United States, this could be said of anywhere else. You know, with everything that we have in the world, we're putting people in outer space. And yet at the same time, we turn around and we have people that don't have access to healthcare. It's ridiculous. We can solve that.
Wow. So, Mr. Obenson, do you envision yourself writing Bridging the Opportunity Gap Part 2?
Well, they say once you write once, it, you know, let me say this. If I would have a deal with this audience that if you read, I will write. You know, the most important thing is for people to read and be inspired. This book has 9 chapters, and there are some chapters that are very short in the book and that are deliberate, because there is a chapter here on something that I call shared leadership. And shared leadership is really, it's not a concept that is understood the way that it should be. We have leadership, and there are various types of leadership, and a lot has been written about leadership. But when we think about leadership, we think about it in the context of the person who has the title, or the person who has the banners or stripes on their shoulders, or the person who's appointed or elected. But you see, when you but shared leadership is a concept that we really need to understand, because that's the way that we're going to save ourselves from ourselves, right? That we get to the point where we don't see the leader as the person who is sitting at the top, backing down orders, but you see the leader as the person who is at the center. And this is typical in the African tradition. So if you look at our village council meetings, there was never a stage where people have to sit on the stage. The village council meetings were always circular, with people sitting together and solving problems. And I think that, again, I try to use some of these African concepts to try to say, let's think differently. So leadership is something that I hope that one day I'll be able to write about.
I will be your first person to purchase that book.
And you know what they say about leadership? It's, example, it's not the best way to lead. It's the only way. So I will write about it if I can demonstrate that I'm a good example of one.
I think everyone here can attest that, you're a good example. Even you've been in an international institute for less than a year, you've done a lot of great things. So thank you for that, and thank you for changing the St. Louis region. So I know right now it's about 6:49. We're going to open the floor to for questions from our audiences. If you have any question, please do not hesitate to type in your question in the chat, or if you want, you can unmute your mic and ask Mr. Obenson your question. If you decide to do the latter, please limit your question to less than a minute. Thank you very much in advance. So let's see for right now the questions that are here on the chat. So we have a question from Zalipa. It says, Arrey, how would you respond when someone has a powerful mindset, but there are geographical challenges, leaving this as a broad set of challenges?
So I assume that the geographical challenges would be you're in a very poor country, or you're in a poor state of life. And there is this there's this story of this guy who discovered the windmill, who created a windmill in Malawi, and has gone all through the world. So this was a little boy, and there's a movie actually that was done I can't remember his name now, but I think it was Godwill or somebody like that, who there was no light in the village, and he had been trying to use batteries, going to the scrapyard to figure out a way that he could find light so that he could read. And it's very funny because, this was a child in very difficult circumstances, trying to find a way to find just light bulb, just so that he could read at school. And somebody told him about Google, and he started looking for Google, said, you would find your answers in Google, but he never imagined that Google was on it. It was the internet. Google was on it. He thought Google was somebody's name, and Google would provide him the answer. But that's just a joke to say that no matter where you are, no matter what your limitations are, and of course, you will not achieve things in the same dimension as people who have more opportunities. You may be limited in opportunities, but the more you can think about solutions, the more you can come out of your current state, right? You really have to open your mind to the circumstances that are different. And that's what I would say about people, is that don't worry about how you're going to grow from where you are and compare yourself with somebody else. Worry about, what is the solution that I need? What is the vision that I have? And work towards that vision. And you can have a vision anywhere, in a village setting, in a desert setting. There's always opportunity. Look at Dubai. Look at the country Dubai. That out of desert sands, we have skyscrapers. The people who are origin of Dubai doesn't have the oil that the other Emirates have. They could have sat there tearing and cursing why they were part of this emirate and not the other emirates that have all the oil. But look at where they are. They dreamed. Somebody had a dream, and that's where they are now. So it can be done anywhere in the world.
Dream big, because it may come true. So the next question is about, pivoting back to leadership and, the way how we look at problems. Are we going to focus on the challenges? Are we going to focus on the opportunity? So Dr. Mutino, if you wanted to see if you can elaborate on the difference between Amazon and Sear, and what did
Okay.
Sear get so wrong?
Yeah, I did. I wrote about that in the book. The challenge between how, and that was the first chapter, the opportunity trumps challenge, and I used the case of Amazon and Sears to see how different mindset could lead to different results. Many people do not know that over 100 years ago, Sears was doing what Amazon is doing today. Sears is the first company in the world that had a catalog, and in that catalog, there were products and pictures of their products, and you could order from the catalog, and Sears would deliver your home furniture to your house. Sears would deliver your cooker, they would deliver everything. Sears was selling everything. And Sears was very successful. It changed the marketplace. Then Sears started building all of these malls so people could either order or they could just walk over there and see what they wanted and then order it from there. They did the same thing. And look at the business model of Amazon. In 1996, Amazon started. So instead of going to a bookshop, I'm just going to put the pictures of the book online and you can order the book online. Same thing, same thing. The difference was that Amazon was doing this online and Sears was doing it in the catalog. 100 years later, you would have thought that Sears would be progressing. Oh, it's 100 years now, there's technology, let's leverage technology and let's move forward. You know what happened to Sears? Sears saw its market share drop about 40%. Sears was focused on regaining that 40% drop, asking themselves, doing all sorts of study to understand why they were dropping 40%, investing so much money on what the challenge was that they failed to see the opportunity. All of that research, all of that study, Sears could have bought out Amazon at the time. Easily, they had the resources to buy out Amazon, or they had the resources to invest on a technological platform that would have been more powerful than what Amazon had. They failed to do that because they were focused on their challenge. They were trying to make up numbers. They were focused on the past rather than the future, what the opportunity was. They were never going to go back 100 years to become the global #1 in the world, but they could have still been a thriving company today because there's enough room in the market. But today they're bankrupt. They're out of business because they were focusing on their challenge. That's the difference. And Amazon keeps reinventing itself every day, capitalizing on new technology, new opportunities, and all of that. But they have the same business model as Sears had 100 years ago.
Thank you. Follow up on that question. So how can we as an individual reinvent ourselves to see the opportunities that lies ahead?
Well, the only way is that you train your mind. So the brain is a muscle, right? And every muscle can be trained. You train the brain to act in a certain way. You train the brain to go for exercise. You train the brain not to eat. If you have to fast, you train the brain to fast. So there's so many things that you do with the muscle, just like every other muscle. In the same way, the brain responds to habits. So if you make it a habit of thinking about the opportunity that's how you're going to start seeing everything that's happening around you. And sometimes I run into problems with people because they tell me a terrible situation, and I say, but that's where the opportunity is. That's our opportunity, right? Because I'm seeing every challenge as an opportunity. And once you just train your mind gradually, and I ask people to try it. It just continues, look at a challenge that comes your way tomorrow and ask yourself, what is the opportunity here? And you would always find an opportunity in every challenge. So you have to, and this just becomes a natural thing. And I ask people, I've repeated several times in the book, train yourself. Tell yourself that if you are defined, if you focus on your challenge, you become defined by that challenge. If you focus on the opportunity, you become defined by the opportunity, and focus on that. Just keep telling yourself that, what is the opportunity here? And gradually you would see that that's how you start thinking.
And we have a last question from the audience. I have a question from Fred. So, welcome to St. Louis, Mr. Obenson. What are the different challenges do you see facing Christian refugee as opposed to Muslim refugee in St. Louis?
Well, let me start by saying I'm sure that we're going to have a challenge here, but that's not how I want to look at human beings. All right, I don't want to define people as refugees. I see them as human beings, and I also see them as having preference over one way of worship or the other. I don't see it as Christian or Muslim. And that's how I want to look at it. That's how I'm approaching my work. I'm approaching my work as everybody who comes to our shows is a human being. And I'm focusing on creating opportunities for them to achieve their greatest potential. I refrain from defining people by the way that we have been told that this is the best way for us to attain our spiritual connection. And I want to see them as human beings. I focus on giving everybody equal opportunities, no matter what. But I also want to walk in their shoes as they get here. So, Fred, we adapt to everybody's own reality, and of course, those realities are very different. But I really refrain from defining people by how they worship.
My sincere apology, Mr. Obenson. I know that I said that that was the last question, but I'm just now
I
realizing
see
that.
2 hands up, right?
So let's go with Dr. M and then Zalupa.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Out and
5 on
clear.
5. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Obenson, for this piece. Sorry, I haven't read the book already. I just got the information about the Zoom tonight. So my question is, coming back to the topic of leadership, you talk about bridging the opportunity gap. Does the book in any way speak to women stepping up to leadership positions, since advancing women to leadership roles is not a formal business priority? I'm just curious. Thank you.
Well, when I talk about bridging the opportunity gap, especially in the last chapter of the book, I speak about all of these challenges. I say that if people embrace the concepts of all the first 8 chapters of the book, then we can solve the world's biggest challenges. And one of the world's biggest challenges is that we have not understood that 50% of the world's population cannot have the same, we're leaving them out of, we're not giving them the same opportunities that the other 50% have. And women actually have more, it's 51%. And it's foolhardy for us to think that we can be successful as the human race without giving women equal opportunities. That's why when I started this conversation, I said, I define myself as a husband, right? In many cases, we define people as wives, and yet we fail to realize that even the men are husbands to powerful wives. So in that context, one of the things that I talk about in the book is really it's equality, that being able to bring as more women into the workforce will solve some of the biggest challenges, of address poverty in the world. I talk about it in the book, how I was in Japan and I was trying to transform the Japanese economy essentially by bringing women into workplace, because my organization at the time there had only like 30% of, no, what am I saying, 15% of its membership that were women. And I was saying to them that we could double our membership here if we just embraced women. And I ran into trouble because the Japanese society is complex. The women are not to be seen, are to be seen, not heard, right? And so, yes, you're right. Bridging the opportunity gap means taking challenges like that, giving it a different mindset and saying we have to be up. And it has been done. Look at Rwanda. Look at the amount of women who are in parliament now. There's actually more women than men. It can be done. We just need to change our mindset. We had Thomas Sankara talking about this a long time ago. We had Secretary talking about this a long time ago, that we have to give women, if we want to solve the biggest challenges that the world faces. I also want to use the opportunity to say, we saw what happened during the pandemic. The countries that did the most, who did the best, who performed well, were countries in which women led. You know, look at New Zealand, look at Taiwan. Women leadership in those countries, they sailed through the pandemic. So if the world can see that as an opportunity, if we can bridge the gap by investing in as many women as possible to enter the workforce and leadership, we solve a lot of problems in the world. I'm going to get into trouble now with my African men for saying that.
Yes.
But Dr. Ashoshi, I agree with you that we have to bridge that gap by bringing the women on board, giving them the leadership that they deserve.
Zalisa?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Obenson. That was really, really inspiring. A question I have is, you mentioned about the COP26 and the climate change. That I've been attending virtually that conference, the United Nations food systems, the Global Food Network. Anything you can talk about, the fair trade, the smallholder, anything you can talk about that shows the opportunity that exists in Africa is there. Yeah. And I'm wondering if we don't use the model of bridging the opportunity gap, 100 years from now will be like Sears, where the opportunity was there, but we didn't act on it, or we didn't act on it fast enough. And I'm wondering, at what point do we look at this opportunity that exists in Africa as real and start acting today than just talks, like just stories? Yeah. What is your perception on it?
Well, first of all, I'm saying that it's only going to happen if we advocate for it, if we have a movement around it. And sometimes I think one of my biggest frustrations with where Africa is that when I travel across Africa, there is a lot of apathy, like people are not involved in solving their own problems. We have the weakest civil society, and that's absent from solving problems. And the people who are well-to-do, the middle class, is very absent from progress in Africa. And some of us who have had the opportunity, and I know many of us are here, not, I would love to retire in my village and sit down in my village and eat fresh food and all of that, but it's not possible, right? Because of the circumstances. And so we end up, spending our time here, and there's a lot that we can do. But to your question with Zalifa in reference to this, I spoke about this today. We have no excuse. The world has no excuse now with the amount of data that we have and the technology that we have to say that Africa's problem cannot be solved, or that Africa's problems is for Africans on their own alone. There's no excuse for that. And there's no excuse for Africans to expect that the world will solve their problems for them, because we Africans have access to the same technology that everybody has. Why, with the technology that we have, can we not ensure that, I mean, everybody, there's more people using the cell phone in Africa than the rest of the world. And the reason they're doing that is because that's the only way that they can survive. Now, how is it that we know that people are consuming the smartphone, and how come we as Africans cannot capitalize on that to solve all our problems? Whether it's healthcare delivery, we have access to that. Whether it's education, we have access to this. Whether it's shared economy, we have access to this. We are not just thinking about this as ways in which we could leapfrog the continent to that future that we want. All of these things, talking about fair trade and all of that, we have the ability now with this technology to ensure that, you know, I traveled to one of the most remote parts of New Zealand, and I was, you know, on a ranch with a farmer, and the farmer was telling me something that fascinated me. He said, with my phone, I know where the piece of steak that comes from my cattle is eaten in San Francisco. Because, why is that important? Because it tells me how I'm going to grow my cattle. Where my cattle goes and is eaten tells me how I'm going to grow it, because that's understanding a market. And here we are, this is the continent that has all the cocoa, the coffee, and everything in the world, and we're still struggling. We're struggling because we're not just seeing the big picture. That we went from Africa, where the rest of the world went from desktop computers to tablets and then to smartphones. And we in Africa, the best, even before, we just went straight to smartphones, right? Many people never saw, if you ask many people in Africa what a desktop is, they wouldn't know. But they have a smartphone that has all the capabilities in their hand. The challenge that we have is that we're waiting to go step by step by step. That's not going to happen because we're always going to be behind. That's where bridging the opportunity, the gap comes in, that you cannot think about that progressively. You have to think about the big picture. What is that picture and how we're going to radically transform things to get there? And so my sister Zelifa, we have to start thinking that way. And sometimes when you talk about that, people think that you're insane, but out of insanity, we'll find the future of Africa. So let's start thinking big picture. Let's start thinking audaciously, Wakanda-like. Let's think about it Wakanda-like, because that's where we want to get to, you know. And Brian, you asked about the next book that I'm writing, and I started scribbling the next book. And I'm imagining a situation where the world comes to the African Union to ask the African Union for solutions to its own crisis. Because we still have the trees that the rest of the world doesn't have. We still have the rivers that the rest of the world doesn't have. We still have the growing population that the rest of the world doesn't have. We have the youngest population that the rest of the world doesn't have. We have the minerals that make these phones work that the rest of the world doesn't have. The thing that is missing that we don't have, that the rest of the world has, is our mindset. We just need to make that work, and the world will come to us. It may not happen today, but we have to sow the seeds for this to happen.
Let me see if we have one more
That's
question.
powerful.
Someone mentioned, but we don't have military technology.
But we don't have military technology.
Any comment to that?
So I don't know, why do we need military technology? The only reason we need military technology is because some people are disadvantaged, right? If you created opportunities for everybody, we will not be fighting. There are countries in the world that don't have the military and are doing well. We shouldn't be spending our time and money investing on how we kill one another. What if we changed our mindset and focused our time on money and saving lives and preserving the planet? We don't need military technology. But with that said, if where there is progress, you can have the technology to do anything that you want. We don't have military technology because we don't have the right mindset.
Right, let's see. Any more questions from our audiences? Going once. So, Mr. Obenson, since there is no question from our audiences, what would be a takeaway message from this event tonight? What do you want the great people?
I'll ask a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Fred.
I'll ask a question.
Yes.
I heard you say to embrace diversity. I also understand that in diversity comes religions, and in religions there come leadership. There's leadership in both ways, in the Muslim or Christians. Will it be possible one day to have a big, huge meeting with all the Africans, leaders from both groups, religions, and just to discuss with them straight how they can go back and invest on the people and invest back home and invest in the region of St. Louis, working in unity with others.
Let me just, when you say both groups, what do you mean by both groups?
By both religion leadership. So the Muslims, I know you don't want to define by that, but we need to embrace it. We need to embrace that.
Okay.
We need to embrace that.
So you're actually defining the African people as Christian and Muslim. And that's the most that we can do is Christian and Muslim, right? But you just acknowledge that there is more than Christian and Muslims in religion.
I acknowledge that, but in the African, okay, in a region in St. Lucia, we have there's two huge communities. There are Muslim communities that goes to the mosque, and we have Catholics, which we have different Christianity.
Christianity.
I know they are a big constituent of the African community in St. Louis, and and you being the new face of St. Louis, of International Institute who welcomes immigrants, will it be something very wise to invite all of those big churches and mosque leaders and their members to be on one table and discuss how they can contribute to St. Louis and also take it back home and contribute
back to Africa? Yes, I would love, so let's put this on the radar. Let's talk about this. April 25th is Africa Day. We have enough time now to plan for us to get together. But let's not get together within the context of how we define ourselves as religion and all of that. The very interesting thing is I've been studying this now in the last maybe the last 6 months. And I'm glad you brought this up because I'm getting a lot more awareness in this. And I'm speaking about this independent of my role at the International Institute, but I'm learning a lot more about African origin and our own story and who we are, right? And it's really interesting that as I've been learning about this, I'm really asking myself and I'm questioning myself, like, how did it come to the point where we are defined by a religion that is foreign to the African continent? Again, and I say this, I don't have anything against the religions. And then, I'm a Christian. I went to a Catholic boys' school. So Even, but how did we get here, right? When we think about the future of the continent, we have to also think about our past. How did we get here, and how come we became defined by something that is foreign to our own continent? And even in the context of this, you can go further to say, how come we call ourselves Kenyans, and we call ourselves Cameroonians and Nigerians? How did we get here that we have other people give us names? My name is Leonard Arrey Obenson. There's a reason why I'm not using the Leonard, because that's the name that is foreign to who I am, right? It was just given to me, but my African names were given to me for a reason. The other ones were just thrown out, so we have to start thinking about this and saying, and that's where having the ability to define ourselves by what is really ours is really the beginning of us getting our own real independence, right? Again, I'm not saying this to be against another person's religion or another person's culture, but I'm just saying that we cannot define ourselves by what is foreign to us. What is common amongst us is that we're born on a continent that is full of diversity, that has people that come to this, that in most, what is common to all of us is probably that we all look at our ancestors as the people that really bless us here today. Why can we not define ourselves by that? I've spent a lot of time in Japan, and several times I asked the Japanese people, but what is your religion? And they say, we have ancestors. How many? They say, well, my family, I have about 3,000 that went before me. That hasn't stopped them from being successful as a continent because they are not Christian or they are not Muslim. As a country, they have been successful. Are they all going to, well, let me not go into that, but I'm just saying that I'm happy to meet with the African community. Let's get together. Let's figure out what we can do for the African continent. But let's not divide ourselves by how we're defining religion and all of that. No, we have a common destiny. We came here, we have to thrive here. But where we come from, there is a lot of work to be done. Let's put our energies there.
Following up on that, that's a good way to put it. At the same time, we need to embrace the way we are today. We call ourselves Christian, Catholic, and this is a lot of us who are.
So Fred, that is totally fine if that's what you want to embrace. But I'm telling you how I am going to perceive it, right? And if I'm going to be involved in this, I'm not going to judge you by how you worship. I want to judge you for who you are, for the qualities that you possess. And I mean, that's really important, that we judge people for their own abilities, for the content of their character, to borrow the words of Martin Luther King. That's how I want you to judge me, and that's how I want to judge you. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether I'm from Cameroon. Don't even consider me as Cameroon. Consider me as your brother, right? Doesn't matter how I worship or no, it doesn't matter. All of those, that doesn't matter. But I would never impose my thinking on you. So if you bring the African community together, whether they're Christian or Muslim, we have the same goals. Let's address them. But let's not, that's how I look at it, and I'll leave it at that. Yeah. Okay. Well, with that, Brian, you were asking me what's my last message to everybody.
Yes. What is your
and
Africans?
The way that I'll end this is the story of a smart young man who met this wise man. This gentleman thought he was so smart. He had the answer to every question. But when he met this wise man, the wise man said to him that I have in my hand a bird. Can you tell me whether this bird is alive or the bird is dead? And the young man said to him that the bird was dead. And the wise man opened his hand and the bird flew away. And the wise man said to him that, you know, I was in the position where I could decide. If you said the bird was alive, I could squeeze it and kill it. If you said that the bird was dead, I did exactly what I did. I opened my hands and the bird flew away. I think that the future is in our hands. We can squeeze it and kill it, or we can open our hands and let it fly. That's the way I see the struggle between challenge and opportunity. We can be stuck with the challenge and we're dead, or we can embrace opportunity and we fly into a beautiful future. That's what I'd like to end with, and encourage anybody who hasn't bought the book, who hasn't read the book, to find a copy of it. And you would be, I tell a really great stories, short stories in the book about my leadership experience. And I hope that it helps you form your own leadership experience, develop your own path, and play your own role in humanity, in our common destiny. So thank you very much for taking time. I know it's a busy week, but thank you for being here and for, you know, went above the time that we planned to be here. I hope that you all enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Obenson, for being with us here today. And thank you to all of our audiences for tuning in. We appreciate you for being here and asking a relevant question. So without further ado, we will see you guys, you fine ladies and gentlemen, to our next event. So thank you all and have a great Friday, Junior.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thank you so much, our speaker tonight. I was just listening to you and I'm like, Arrey Benson, we need to have a series of this discussion. We need more to talk about this leadership and how we can be able to change our mindset. As I'll say, I have your book with me, and I think I think it's where you talk about how does one develop the ability to think the big picture. I think you say that think about one thing that you will like to change around you. So, think again, think beyond yourself. This is not about you. It is about it is not about your personal gain or happiness. What are you passionate about? What talents do you have? How can you leverage that talent to change the thing that you want to change? Write this down. And you also goes down and you say, paint a picture in your mind of what you seek to achieve. Visualization is a powerful tool for achieving your goals. It is actually the picture in the big picture thinking. Powerful, man. I read it and I felt I would encourage everyone to get it. I think I shared the link there for people who want to be able to buy them online. For me, when I ordered it was that fast. It was very quick. So I think when you talk about changing a mindset, when you were just giving a conversation, I could see a lot of things even before we go to Africa. I think there is a lot of things we need to change in terms of our mindset here. And just by making that shift, we will be able to change a lot on what is happening in Africa. And when you talk about mindset, it's very hard to change people, but it's very easy to change yourself. And I think when you talk about me and you thinking about, I'm not from Cameroon, I'm not from Kenya. I think I made that shift myself a while ago. And I hang around a lot with people who are not from Kenya. I hang around people who don't even share any faith together. because I want to see them, me as a human being, and I want us to know them as a human being. And until we make that mind shift, we cannot be able to. We will always be talking about the challenges, like you talk about. We focus on the challenges, we will be defined by challenges. But we focus on opportunities, then we'll be defined by the opportunities. And I'm so happy to say that by focusing on that, we can see a lot of great progress, things happening in our community because of us focusing on the opportunities and not the challenges. So with that, I would say thank you so much for people who were able to join in tonight. But I would say, I want to invite you. This is our speak. Oops, I hope my phone, my computer doesn't die before we finish. I don't have my charger here, but I want to invite you guys for, if you go to our website and you go to vitandaforafrica.org events page, you will be able to see our events. That was our event tonight. Our next event, which is going on, is actually the art therapy we are doing for kids. And then the next, on Sunday, this Sunday, we have an event at Christ Covenant Church where we are doing COVID vaccine for also booster shots, and also those who have kids. This is a time to start getting vaccine. We had a great conversation last night from people from both sides, both faiths, both different region, and people from different background. And then our next speaker series, which will be December the 1st, we will be meeting, talking to Giselle Marcus. And this is very important because she talks about the power of networking. With the mindset, you have good networking, you're good to go. So let's go and let's focus on that. And then the last item is our dinner. This is a great opportunity for us to connect as Africans and connect with our friends. And we enjoy that African in us, not from this country, but the people